You ever walk outside one morning just to find a bunch of strangers on your land with chainsaws, cutting down something you built with your own two hands? Yeah, that happened to me. They weren't thieves or vandals, not in the traditional sense. No, they were contractors, sent by a local HOA I wasn't even part of, hired by some self-important woman with a clipboard and a power complex. Let me back up a second. I live on a ranch just outside a little town in Missouri. It's been in my family for 4 generations. Almost 60 acres of pasture, rolling hills, a creek cutting through the back, and more memories tied to this place than I can count. My grandparents built this land from scratch, raised cattle, planted fields. It's the kind of place you grow into, not grow out of. A few years ago, they built a new gated community just across the creek from me, Maple Hollow Estates. Big red-roofed houses, identical flower beds, driveways so clean you could eat off them. The whole thing felt like a suburb tried to cosplay as a castle. And of course, it came with a homeowners association, the kind run by people who think their garden gnomes give them legal authority. Now, I don't live in Maple Hollow, I don't pay dues, I don't get their newsletters, and I sure as hell didn't sign up for their rules. But that didn't stop them from trying to beautify the surrounding area, as they called it, which apparently meant telling me what to do with my own property. First, it was complaints about my cattle being noisy. Then, someone griped about the smell near the fence line. Someone else didn't like how my barn looked unmaintained, as if peeling red paint on a 100-year-old structure was offensive to their sense of suburban peace. I mostly ignored it. I figured they'd get bored eventually. But the real problem started when I built a small wooden footbridge across the creek. Nothing fancy, just a few beams and planks so I could get my ATV across to the far pasture without having to loop around for half a mile. It wasn't even visible unless you were actively snooping. But apparently, that bridge offended someone's delicate aesthetic. The HOA started sending me letters saying it was unauthorized and clashing with the neighborhood's visual harmony. Again, not part of the HOA. I told them exactly that, in very polite but very clear language. You'd think that'd be the end of it, right? Wrong. Because one morning, I walked out with my coffee in hand. And there they were. A crew of guys with saws tearing the bridge apart like it was some kind of rogue structure threatening national security. And standing just beyond them, arms folded, smug as hell, was Veronica Hill, the HOA president herself. That's when I realized this wasn't about a bridge. This was about control. And she'd just crossed the wrong line. Stick around. It gets a whole lot messier from here. I wish I could tell you that after I caught them in the act. After I told Veronica and her little chainsaw brigade to get the hell off my property, they backed off. But they didn't. They just got bolder. After the bridge incident, I assumed they'd at least try to clean up their mess or apologize. I mean, it was pretty damn obvious they had zero legal right to step foot on my land, let alone destroy something on it. But instead of owning up to it, Veronica doubled down. That same day, I got a typed letter, slipped under my gate, no stamp, no envelope, on Maple Hollow HOA letterhead. It read like some corporate press release, filled with phrases like community expectations, visual impact, and my personal favorite, non-compliant architectural elements. You'd think I built a missile silo back there, not a rough-hewn wooden bridge that kept me from getting my boots soaked crossing a creek. And then came the kicker. The HOA reserved the right to remove or request removal of any structure that negatively impacted neighborhood cohesion. Again, I don't live in their damn neighborhood. Now, at this point, I was doing my best to stay civil. I hadn't contacted a lawyer yet. I hadn't gone on Facebook to rant. I figured if I just stood my ground, they'd eventually realize they were poking the wrong bear. Nope. 2 days later, I caught a woman, mid-60s, purse slung over one shoulder, big sunglasses, taking photos of my property from the edge of their side of the creek. Not just the bridge area, but my barn, the pasture, even my dogs. I stepped outside and waved, just to be neighborly. She turned and power walked back to Maple Hollow like she'd seen a ghost. Turns out she was on the HOA board too. Of course she was. Then the calls started. They somehow got my number, no idea how, maybe public records, and left me voicemails pretending to be friendly community outreach. One guy actually said, "Hey there, Just wondering if you'd considered updating your fencing. We've noticed a bit of rust. Buddy, unless you're offering to power wash it yourself, don't call me about my damn fence. But the worst part? The subtle harassment. My mailbox, mounted by the front gate, got knocked over 3 times in 1 week. Could have been coincidence, but I live on a dead-end gravel road with no real traffic. Once I found fresh tire marks coming from the Maple Hollow side of the creek, cutting across my field. And there was that time I found a handwritten note taped to my tractor seat that just said, "Your property brings down the value of ours." No name, just that. Every time something happened, I'd feel that tight coil in my chest start to wind tighter. I'm not the kind of guy who looks for trouble. I like my quiet mornings, my animals, my space. But this wasn't some misunderstanding anymore. This was targeted. Veronica wasn't just trying to push me around. She was trying to make me snap. She wanted a reaction. Something she could wave in front of her HOA board and say, "See? He's unstable. We need to do something." And the bridge? That wasn't about safety or appearances. That was her little power play, her way of showing me that in her mind, she was in charge, even outside her gates. But I didn't give her what she wanted. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I documented. I took pictures. I saved letters. I installed a motion camera by the driveway and caught one of their residents tossing a trash bag over my fence, likely some not-so-subtle message about cleanliness. And all the while, I kept rebuilding the bridge. Nothing fancy, just enough to get across the creek again. I wanted them to see it go back up. I wanted them to know I wasn't rolling over. And sure enough, it triggered the next level of HOA insanity. That's when Veronica showed up again. This time, not with a crew, but with a clipboard, a smug smile, and a man in a golf shirt who introduced himself as the Community Compliance Officer. They stood on my side of the creek, just past the tree line, and started taking measurements. I walked right up to them. "You're trespassing," I said flatly. Veronica smirked and said, "According to the Maple Hollow Code of Ordinances, any structure visible from within the subdivision must meet aesthetic requirements." I blinked. "I'm not in your subdivision." She didn't even flinch. "But the visual footprint of your property affects our residents. We're simply here to assess and record." It took everything in me not to laugh or scream. Instead, I just said, "You've got 5 seconds to walk back across that creek before I call the sheriff. And this time, I'm pressing charges." They left. Slowly. But not before Veronica gave me one last smug look like this wasn't over. And at that point, I knew she was right. It wasn't over. But what she didn't know was that I'd had enough. And I was about to stop playing defense. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not some legal wizard who knows every statute and loophole by heart. But I do know when something feels wrong. And what that HOA did, what Veronica did, felt damn wrong from the start. So that night, after they strutted off my property with their clipboards and fake titles, I sat down at my kitchen table, poured myself a stiff drink, and pulled out every document I had. Deed, plat map, county boundary records, everything. And there it was, clear as day. My property line didn't just sit outside the Maple Hollow development. It sat outside the jurisdiction of their entire HOA. I was never part of their community, never signed a thing, and most importantly, they had no legal right to enforce anything on my land. I took screenshots. I printed county maps. I even went out and hammered in new, bright orange no trespassing signs around the creekside border. Big enough that even the snootiest Karen couldn't miss them from her garden bench. And then I made the call. Chuck is a local attorney I've known since high school. Smart, calm, and not afraid to get his boots muddy. I gave him the rundown, emailed him the photos, the letters, the bridge wreckage, everything. 10 minutes later, my phone rings. Chuck goes, "You're sitting on a silver platter of a lawsuit, man. They walked right onto your land and destroyed your property. You've got photos, timestamps, eyewitnesses. This isn't a maybe case, this is slam dunk territory." I leaned back in my chair, heart still pounding, but for the first time, not from anger, from relief. From the feeling that maybe, I was finally about to turn the tables. Chuck drafted a formal demand letter, clean, concise, and brutal. It laid out every single violation: trespassing, destruction of private property, attempted enforcement of unauthorized HOA regulations, and more. We asked for $5,000 in damages, the estimated cost to rebuild the bridge, plus cleanup and labor. We hand-delivered it to the HOA office at the front of Maple Hollow. I even waited in the truck while Chuck walked it in, just to see if Veronica would show up. She didn't. But someone sure called her fast because the very next day, I got a letter back, unsigned, typed in that same HOA tone-deaf language. We will not be providing financial compensation for the removal of a structure that does not meet our aesthetic standards. As a courtesy to the surrounding community, we have acted in accordance with Maple Hollow's visual guidelines. No apology, no acknowledgement of their overreach. Just more of that smug HOA lingo, like I was some weed they needed to pull for the good of the neighborhood ecosystem. That was the last straw. Chuck filed suit that Friday. And the moment we submitted that claim, everything changed. Suddenly, the HOA board started panicking. People who had been watching from their manicured lawns now looked nervous. One guy I'd never spoken to, a younger dad from the development, actually stopped by my gate and told me quietly, "You're doing the right thing. A lot of us can't stand her either. She's been bullying people for years." The hearing came up faster than expected. Small claims court, local judge, nothing fancy, but it was official. Veronica showed up in full blazer and pearls mode, trying to play the role of the concerned community leader. But Chuck came armed with exhibits: photos of the destroyed bridge, the property line maps, dated letters, and even a printout from the county website showing exactly where the HOA's reach ended. And when the judge asked, "Did the HOA receive permission to enter the plaintiff's property?" Veronica paused and said, "We believed we had implied authority due to the visual impact of the structure." The judge raised an eyebrow. "In other words," he said, "no?" She didn't answer. And just like that, boom, we won. The court ruled in our favor, awarded me $8,000 in damages, and issued a formal injunction against the Maple Hollow HOA, meaning they were legally barred from stepping foot on my land for any reason going forward. Chuck called it a beautiful little smackdown. But for me, it was more than just a win. It was the moment the scales tipped. For weeks, I'd been playing defense, trying to hold the line, trying to keep my cool while they poked, pushed, and prodded. But now I had something they couldn't ignore. I wasn't just the rancher next door anymore. I was the guy who stood up and made them pay for crossing the line. After the ruling, you'd think that would be the end of it, right? You'd think that getting smacked down in court, forced to cough up $8,000 and slapped with a no-contact injunction would finally knock some sense into Veronica Hill and her HOA goon squad. But nope. That kind of entitlement doesn't just vanish, it festers. I could feel it every time I drove past the edge of Maple Hollow. Those manicured lawns, those perfect flower beds, those matching mailboxes, it all looked exactly the same. But something had shifted. The way their residents glanced over the fence now, it wasn't judgment anymore. It was embarrassment. Veronica, though, she avoided me entirely. Not a word. Not a wave. Not even one of her trademark dirty looks. And honestly, that silence was almost more unsettling than the harassment had been. But here's the thing. I wasn't about to let them forget what they'd done. Because yeah, I won. But they crossed a line. A literal, legal, and moral line. They came onto my land. They cut down a structure I built. And then they tried to justify it with some warped sense of visual superiority. So I decided to make my message permanent. The first thing I did was rebuild the bridge, this time with steel-reinforced beams, solid concrete footings, and a little extra flair. Decorative iron railings, pressure-treated cedar decking, solar lights lining both sides. The thing looked like it belonged in a national park. It was beautiful. And it was visible. I wanted them to see it, every single day, shining in the sun like a monument to their failure. But that wasn't the main event. No, the real payback came in the form of a fence. See, I realized something after the lawsuit. The HOA had a clear line of sight into my property from almost every backyard that backed up to the creek. That was why they'd always felt so entitled to comment, criticize, and control, because they could see me. So, I fixed that. I called up a local fencing company and said, I want privacy. Lots of it. We planned it out together. 8-foot tall, pressure-treated pine with overlapping slats for total opacity. Stained dark brown, solid as hell. And it didn't stop at the property line. They followed the entire length of the creek, wrapping around the pasture, all the way to the far edge where the barbed wire used to be. It took 3 weeks to finish. When it was done, I stood on my porch with a beer and just admired it. You couldn't see a damn thing from Maple Hollow anymore. Not my barn, not my cows, not my new bridge. It was like I disappeared. The funniest part? HOA members tried to complain. I heard through the grapevine they were furious. It ruins the view. It blocks natural light. Someone even claimed the wood color clashed with the seasonal tones of their landscaping. But guess what? It's my fence, on my land, and they had no say in the matter. For once, I was the one holding the power, and it felt damn good. Still, I wasn't done. Just to twist the knife a little further, I added a hand-painted sign to the middle of the fence, facing their side. It read, in bold white letters, private property, no trespassing, no HOA jurisdiction beyond this point. Enjoy the view. Some might say it was petty. I call it therapeutic. But the absolute chef's kiss moment? That came a couple of weeks later. I got a call from the county clerk's office. Apparently, Veronica had tried to file a complaint against me for creating a hostile perimeter and intentionally obstructing community unity. The clerk was laughing as she read it to me. Said it was one of the dumbest filings they'd seen in years. He closed it out on the spot. I could almost hear her shriek echoing through the HOA clubhouse. From that point on, everything quieted down. The letters stopped. The phone calls disappeared. Nobody dared to step foot near my land again. It was over. For real this time. And it wasn't just a win in court, it was a win in spirit. A reminder that just because someone wears a name badge and carries a clipboard doesn't mean they get to bulldoze your rights, your land, or your life. I wasn't just protecting a bridge. I was protecting everything that bridge stood for. My space, my freedom, my family's legacy, and I'll be damned if anyone, especially an HOA president with a superiority complex, ever takes that from me again. Looking back now, I gotta say, I don't miss the drama, not one bit. The dust has settled, the cows are grazing like nothing ever happened, and that bridge, the one they tried so hard to erase, is still standing stronger than ever. The privacy fence, holding up like a champ. Not a single peep from Maple Hollow in months. And Veronica? Well, word around town is that she stepped down as HOA president. Apparently, some of the other board members weren't too thrilled about getting slapped with a lawsuit just because she couldn't mind her own business. One guy, retired dentist, real quiet type, actually sent me a handwritten note apologizing for the unfortunate events and saying he hoped the fence brings peace to both sides. I'll take it. But you know what? This whole ordeal taught me something important, something I think a lot of folks need to hear. Just because someone speaks with confidence doesn't mean they speak with authority. Veronica strutted around like she ruled the whole zip code. She weaponized forms, letters, jargon, and social pressure to make people think she had power. But when it came down to it, when the law stepped in and the facts got laid out, she didn't have a leg to stand on. All she had was a clipboard and a bad attitude. And listen, I get it. HOAs can be useful when they stay in their lane. They help maintain standards inside their communities, fix common areas, keep things orderly. But the second they start looking over the fence and thinking your property is their problem, that's where the line needs to be drawn, literally and figuratively. So if you're watching this and you're dealing with something similar, an overreaching HOA, a nosy neighbor, someone trying to micromanage your life from across the street, here's my advice. Know your rights, document everything, and don't back down. Because trust me, when you finally stand your ground and they realize you can't be pushed around, that moment is pure satisfaction. Anyway, thanks for sticking around and listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, or if you've ever had to deal with a petty HOA nightmare, go ahead and hit that like button. Maybe even subscribe if you want more stories like this one. I've got plenty. And hey, don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay free, stay grounded, and keep your fences tall.